Hey, Tom,
Let's describe it.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, I want you to address the nastiness, because even in my book, Long Walker, one of the illustrations that was given to my sketch artist, who's a talented man, Brian Snowdy, in my opinion, probably one of the most gifted illustrators on the planet, the ritual that I was, and you guys need to understand this, is that the ritual that I was given to give to my sketch artist, and then it was given back to a high-ranking military general that happened to be at this horrid ceremony where there was child sacrifice and the Annunciation. This is, by the way, after the last Pope's death. During his funeral, on the underground Rome labyrinth, and some of the things that were present, including whether people can handle this or not, a live giant. I mean, this was given to me by an active duty general. And guess who was there? Cesar Chavez. And I'm sorry, not Cesar, Hugo. My apologies. I've got Cesar on my mind. Hugo Chavez was there, and he ran out of this ceremony. And when he went to the United Nations, the people, the world rulers, here's what people got to understand. When our Lord Jesus stated that the whole world lies in the evil one, that they were there, and the only man that saw it for what it was Chavez. So the fascinating thing is, what we're talking about, the enthronement of Lucifer, we're talking about child sacrifice, we're talking about the raping of children, and then the slaying of children. It doesn't get any more disgusting. It is a blood sacrifice. It's just like the abortion issue. Abortion is a blood sacrifice to Lucifer. And there was and I think that people got to understand this. This isn't a quaint intellectualism. This is full-on slaughterism. There's a new word, Tom, slaughterism, in which these people are invoking all the occult powers that they've been given through their ancestral bloodlines and fallen angels and everything else. And I mean, when people just laugh and say, oh, that stuff's not real, this stuff is very real. So if you take what Chris said, Tom, and add whatever you want to add to it, it's critical that people understand this is not just a bunch of good old boys. These are people that have given their power unto the devil, and in welcoming him and enthroning him, they're ready to announce, guess what? Guess who controls the earth? And that's what is the most tragic, I would say, this mind-numbing thing that I know of, as we're being told in the Scripture. You guys in this book are giving basically the key to the lock of understanding how the false prophet, the Antichrist, and all this stuff is going to play out, and most people just don't grasp the lateness of the hour. So, Tom, add to what Chris just said.
Well, I will do that. And in fact, there is so much that is going on right now, today, in the Vatican that is related to the overall conversation concerning what went on in the 1958 conclave, what went on in the 1963 conclave. Was Siri actually elected? Did he have to step aside, according to Malachi Martin, because of an international presence that came in? All of that is covered in this book, but what's beneath the surface of all of that is all of the principal players are back now. The principal players from the conclave of 1950 to 1963, the principal players of the year 2000 Fatima secret cover-up, when they released the so-called Secret of Fatima in June or July of the year 2000, if you look at who the principal players were then, they're the ones that are creating the shakeup in the Roman Curia right now. So as we have time tonight, if we get to a deeper, I think, conversation about what is happening, people will understand this whole enthronement of Lucifer, what happened in 58, what happened in 63, why Malachi Martin targeted 1961, because all the people, the game players then, are the ones now that are in the news, and most people don't know that because they have, well, we'll talk about that in a moment. There is a reason why, before we went on the air, Steve, that I was saying that people should not read our upcoming book, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. They should not read it haphazardly. And I'm warning people right now that they should pray, even for faith, because we don't want people to be afraid. We're not in the fear business. But what I have personally never dealt with a subject matter that as deep as this investigative research, or as troubling as this investigative research, or as timely as this investigative research, because we're seeing playing out right now in the year 2012, most likely, what has been undertaken from the 1950s and 1960s, and that Malachi Martin so bravely wrote about. And it's so what you have is you have a guy like myself who is both a publisher and an investigative researcher. On the other hand, you have Chris Putnam, who is an apologist and a theologian. In addition to that, I hired a private investigator. We contacted the Dane County Sheriff's Department to look into the murder of Father Coons with the question of, was he, Steve, part of what you were just talking about, was he actually was he a sacrificial victim? Was there something, we definitely know that there was an animal that was mutilated 24 hours exactly before he was killed in the same way. So we can get into all of that if you want. So to answer your question about Malachi Martin and what he said about the enthronement of Lucifer, and to remind people that it was in the 60s, mid-60s, when John Paul the Sixth granted Malachi Martin, who was a high-placed Jesuit priest inside the Vatican, he gave him a dispensation from his duties. Martin moved to New York, and he dedicated himself to writing about what was the term Chris used a moment ago, faction, writing fiction. But what he was really doing was he was telling the world what was going on, and he was trying to do it in a way that he wouldn't wind up getting killed, which some people believe he did anyway, as he was speaking out on issues stemming from the Second Vatican Council, mostly, and other insider accounts of Catholic dogma and geopolitics. He was a member of the Vatican Advisory Council. He was a formidable polyglot. He could speak 17 languages. He was a personal secretary to renowned Jesuit Cardinal Augustine B. He had privileged information pertaining to secretive church and world issues, including the third secret of Fatima, which I want to tie some of this into tonight because it is more important than you might imagine just hearing me say those words, because Martin, if you remember, he spelled out parts of a plan to formally install the dreaded false prophet during a final conclave, but Martin indicated that the third secret of Fatima actually spoke of that final conclave in which Petrus Romanus, the false prophet of biblical fame, would appear. And but behind what was going on in the Vatican, Martin believed that this old scheme that the Illuminati, the Alta Vendita, that the Illuminati would slowly invade the ranks of the Vatican hierarchy and literally turn it in basically to a propaganda tool for their own New Age and enlightened ideas. Well, Martin stated that, in fact, that had happened, and that those were the most powerful characters inside the Vatican. That raises questions as well. Malachi Martin also raised questions about Pope John Paul I. You remember, who was elected Pope in 1978, and he died 33 days, which is a Masonic marker. He died 33 days later. And right after he became Pope, he learned of cardinals, bishops, high-ranking prelates that were Freemasons, and he may have been murdered to keep him from exposing those men's plans and or to deter this investigation that he had launched into the Vatican Bank that was connected with Roberto Calvi, who was a Grand Orient Freemason and the chairman of the Ambresano Bank. And this is part of what's in the news right now, because if you look at these poison pen letters that are part of what's right now, being called the VatiLinks scandal, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
And it's unfolding in Rome in the last few weeks. Well, there is a deeper malaise that exists behind those poison pen letters. And by the way, the Vatican has confirmed that those letters are authentic. And on the surface level, they expose this blistering relationship that is between Archbishop Carlo Vagano and the current Secretary of State, Cardinal Bertoni, Tarcisio Peter Bertoni, Peter the Roman maybe, involving political jockeying and financial deal-making, including charges of chaotic management, corruption, nepotism, cronyism, linked to the awarding of contracts to Bertoni's preferred contractors at inflated prices. That's exactly what was going on when John Paul I was going to report on it, and he died 33 days later. So we're talking about mafioso stuff here, right?
Well, absolutely, and bankers hanging under bridges and the whole situation. There's such a thread of deception, but I think it's important even to Protestants. Protestants don't understand, in my opinion, the significance of this third secret of Fatima. By the way, Tom, I was on Coast to Coast I forget, just within a week or two after Malachi Martin had passed away, and I said flat out, he was murdered, okay? And, people took me to task. Well, how can you know that? I said, look, when you got the fingerprints, this is something people need to understand. Occultists enjoy announcing what they're going to do. They enjoy telling you what they're going to do. And then they enjoy, as one guy said, shoving it, and I won't say where, up the non-learned adepts, or basically, and then mocking the Christians for, believing in prophecy, but not even seeing what they tell. Here's what I've been told by he's a dead Illuminist now, but he said, Steve, what's so amazing, even to us, is the fact that the Christians claim, these are his words, not mine, to believe in prophecy, but they don't even believe what they see with their own eyes, let alone the prophecy they claim to believe. And he just laughed. And I said, I got news for you. His name was Tex. I said, look, Tex. I said, and that's his real name, by the way. He's dead now. I said, that's not the case with everybody. He said, do you realize how few people get it? So listen, ladies and gentlemen, what we're talking about tonight is life-impacting, life-threatening. And as Tom said, and I know that Chris would reiterate this is stuff you pray over. This is stuff that the prophets of long ago longed to look into. This is stuff that even though Daniel was allowed to see, he wasn't allowed to write it, in detail. So the thing is, this is as critical as it gets. And so I'm saying that, Tom and Chris, for the benefit of people saying, well, what is all this Catholic stuff? Let me put that question to you, if you don't mind, Tom, real quick. Chris, what does this all really boil down to in the third secret of Fatima? Can you sum it up? Because, look, the denials and, blah, blah, blah. I can tell you this, the third secret of Fatima is real, and it was so not only prophetic but apocalyptic in the revealing of how it all played out. Naturally, if you're being told that you guys are going to usher in the false prophet, you're not going to go out and broadcast that to 1.3 billion of your followers or worldwide. So will you sum up, if you would, Chris Putnam, will you sum up the third secret of Fatima through all your research? And then, Tom, obviously you want to add to it.
I'll tell you, Steve, I'm skeptical about the third secret of Fatima in one way. And the main thing that I'm skeptical about is that I don't believe that Mary is giving messages to anybody. I think that there's a level of deception going on.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Let me interrupt something. Familiar spirits are familiar and masquerade. I think a good word is masquerade. But I think, and I agree with you, okay? The bottom line is the testimony of Jesus is a spirit of prophecy. But would you just encapsulate what the end time, if you will, content of the third secret of Fatima is, as you understand it? And then, Tom, you, and then I'll throw in whatever 3 cents I have.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know. Okay. I mean, I think Tom's got a better idea of what it is, but I'll tell you, my opinion of it is that it was something that the Catholic Church doesn't want to talk about, and that tells you a lot right there.
Absolutely.
And I think that speaks louder. I mean, everyone has theories about what it is, and according to Malachi Martin, what they're saying it is now can't be true, because he even gave a certain length of it and things like that don't match up to what the story that the official line that they're given now. So whatever it is, they're hiding it. And that tells me more than anything that it's not convenient to their theology. It's not convenient to what they want people to think about them. And I think Tom's got a more specific idea of what it contains. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, well, of course, Malachi Martin, and a lot of what he was writing about, he was writing novels, so he would do fancy things. He would change dates and times, but he would also give you just enough to know who he was actually referring to. The other thing I'd like to say for our audience is that we don't set dates. And when we're talking about the year 2012, when we're talking about prophetic utterances, Harold Camping came along this year and last year, 2011, to remind us once again that it's probably historically unwise to set dates for when things are going to occur. But that's not what motivates me with this. There is a concatenation of events pointing towards the year 2012 as an event horizon that has been, for thousands of years from different cultures pointing at this specific period of time, and that's one of the things I do want to talk about. The other thing, though, is that not only do we not set dates, but when interpreting end times signs, you got to be careful about non-canonical sources. And that could include anything from the novels of Malachi Martin to the writings of famous seers, to Nostradamus, to Edgar Cayce, to Jeannie Dixon, to whatever. But having said that, and I'm approaching it this way because, Chris, of your mentioning that you don't buy the Marian apparitions in the sense that you don't believe Mother Mary is appearing to people at particular points in time and giving them revelations. But I think what you, I, Steve Quayle, all of us would say is that besides divinely appointed Scripture, there have been times when occultic forces also are aware of certain dispensational realities and can make very accurate predictions. And then even God himself, by the way, sometimes uses what we would call unsaved people. That's something that some people, have a hard time wrapping their mind around, but he does do that. He has done that in history. He used Nebuchadnezzar. His dream from the 2nd chapter of Daniel is one of the most central prophecies of all time, one which the most conservative evangelical scholars routinely quote and chart for end-time studies, and that's a prophecy that spans from 600 years before Christ through the second coming of Jesus Christ, and God chose to give that to an arrogant pagan king and then required his holy servant Daniel to interpret it for the narcissistic king. And then, of course, Balaam. Here you got a sorcerer hired by Balak, the Moabite king, who was afraid of the Israelites, and this king sends for the dark wizard Balaam and wants him to prophesy against Israel. And they both live in infamy today, and yet in Numbers 24:17, another of one of the most central prophecies concerning the coming of Christ, in which Balaam prophesied, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. And that prophecy was received 1,000 years before Christ from a hostile source, and yet it is one of the most well-respected prophecies concerning the coming of Jesus Christ. So what do we take from this? There are times where it can be, something is either divinely inspired, or it is demonically inspired, or it is God using an unsaved source. Imagine that. Imagine that. But God uses whatever he wants to use, doesn't he? To tell the world what is coming. And I remember, by the way, when I was a pastor, somebody came to me one day and they asked me why God kept using this one person in the church who they didn't feel was as qualified as they were, and the answer came to me instantly. And I said, it's because they're willing to do it. They'll open their mouth and let God speak, and you're not. So we see that God sometimes uses these most unlikely characters, situations, to get his message across. And so now the big question is, was that also true of the Fatima secrets? Now, we don't have to believe it. The point is, deep inside the Vatican, they do believe it. It is a sanctioned, prophetic series of utterances that the Church has sanctioned. They have canonized the children who gave those prophecies. They deeply and truly believe it. But there's strong evidence that they have covered up whatever the final prophecy actually is, and we'll talk more about that in a moment if you want to. But the question still goes back to what you said earlier, Chris. Not only would it maybe be true of the Fatima secrets, but the prophecy of the popes. You said a moment ago you could illustrate how accurate the prophecy of the popes has been for at least the last 500 years, something higher than an 80 or 90% success ratio, which is better than any prophets I know today. Where did that come from? Where does that inspiration come from? Is it demonic? Was it divine? That's the question, but no matter what anybody believes in that regard, we've reached the end of this Catholic prophecy, and the very next pope is Petrus Romanus, the final pope on the list. And events around the world right now are developing in support of the idea that the Antichrist and the false prophet are here. And that's what this new book, Petrus Romanus, it's 600 pages and 800 authoritative footnotes, is an investigation and conclusion of that startling fact. And then let me add one last thing, and I apologize. I'm not trying to dominate the conversation. You guys just get me anointed, I guess. One final thing. People, well, never mind. Go ahead.